Hello students, welcome to today's class. Today we will be discussing about the living things around us. In this chapter, we went through different habitats and got to know about many plants and animals and their habitats. Now let's learn about living and non-living things. In a previously done activity where we listed objects, plants and animals found in different surroundings, suppose we take a look back and see which examples in our list are living. Let us think of some examples from a forest. What do we find there? Trees, creepers, animals, insects, soil, rocks, dry leaves, water, dead animals, etc. Out of these, which are living? Think of some objects around you and group them as living and non-living things. In some cases, like a chair or a table, it is clear that they are non-living as they cannot talk, walk or feel like us. Similarly, think about yourself. We know that we are alive and so are all the people of this world. Think of some more living things around you. But an important question is that how do we know that something is living? It's not that easy, isn't it? We talked of plants being living things, but do they move like a bird or a dog? At the same time, we see moving cars and buses. Shall we call them living? No, they are not. If growth in size is a characteristic of living things, then like humans and plants, clouds in the sky also grow bigger in size. Does it mean clouds are living? Simply not. So, how does one distinguish between living and non-living things? Are there some specific characteristics to differentiate both? You yourself are a good example of living thing. List some of your characteristics and which of them resemble with that of plants and animals. Now, let us see some of the characteristics which are commonly possessed by all the living beings. First character is that, do all living things need food? In our previous chapter, we discussed how and why food is important to plants and animals. Plants make their own food, whereas animals depends on plants and other animals for their food. Food gives them energy to carry out the life processes. Next characteristic is growth. Do all living things grow? Take a dress of your childhood. Does it fit you now? Obviously not. You have grown, but the dress has not. Have a look at the animals and plants around you. A small puppy and egg have grown up into adult dogs, hen or cock respectively. So also, a small plant grows into a tree after some years. Thus, growth seems to be common to all living things. Let us move towards a next characteristic of living organisms. Do all living things respire? We all breathe, but can we live without breathing? Certainly not. When we breathe in, we inhale the outside air, and when we breathe out, air from inside our body comes out. Breathing is a part of a process called respiration. In respiration, the oxygen that we inhale is used up by the body and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Have you seen cows, cats and dogs while sleeping? the process of breathing is similar to us. Indeed, respiration is necessary for all living things because the body obtains energy from the food it takes through respiration. But the mechanism of respiration may differ in animals. For example, earthworms breathe through their skin. Fish use their gills to absorb the dissolved oxygen in water, about which we have discussed earlier. Moving on to the next characteristic, that is respiration. Do all plants respire? Exchange of gases in plants mainly takes place through their leaves. In sunlight, plants use carbon dioxide of air to produce their own food and give out oxygen. Moving on to the next important characteristic, that is, do all living things respond to stimuli? Think of a situation. You are walking barefoot. Suddenly, you step on a sharp pointed object. How do you respond? Or suddenly, you move from a dark room into bright sunlight. What happens then? Your eyes shut themselves automatically for a moment till they adjust to the changed bright surroundings. In these situations, all of us respond immediately to the changes. All such changes in our surroundings that make us respond to them are called stimuli. This being the case for humans, do other animals and plants also respond to stimuli? You must have seen what happens when food is served to animals. They suddenly become active on seeing the food. Birds fly away when we move towards them. During the night, if bright light is flashed towards wild animals, they run away. What about plants? Flowers of some plants bloom only at night. In some plants, flowers close after sunset. All of you must have seen the mimosa plant, that is, the touch-me-not plant. Their leaves close or fold when someone touches them. Let's do an activity. Place a potted plant in a room a little away from a window through which sunlight enters sometime during the day. Continue watering the plant for a few days. Does the plant grow upright like plants out in the open? Note the direction in which it bends if it's not growing upright. Do you think this may be in response to some stimulus? All living things respond to changes around them. Moving on to the next characteristic, that is excretion. Let us have a look at the living organisms and the process of excretion. All living things take food, out of which a part is utilized by the body and the remaining is waste. But what happens to this waste? It has to be removed from the body. The process of getting rid of these wastes by the living organisms is known as excretion. Do plants also excrete? Yes, they do. However, their mechanism of excretion is different from those of humans and animals. In some plants, some harmful and poisonous materials produced as wastes are either removed as secretions, or some plants store the waste products within their parts in a way that they do not harm them. Excretion is another characteristic common to all living things. Moving on towards the next characteristic, let us see at the process of reproduction. Do all living things reproduce their own kind? Have you seen nests of birds? In the nest, birds lay eggs from which young birds come out. Animals reproduce their own kind. Their mode may be different, like some animals produce young ones through eggs, while some give birth to young ones. Like animals, plants also reproduce. They mainly reproduce through seeds. Seeds produced by them germinate and grow into new plants. Some plants also reproduce through parts other than seeds. In potato plant, a part of a potato with bud grows into a new plant. Plants also reproduce through cuttings. Let us do an activity. Take a cutting from a rose or a mehendi plant. Fix it in the soil and water it regularly. What do you observe after a few days? It may not be easy to grow plants from cuttings, so don't be disappointed if your cutting does not grow. Talk to a gardener about this, if possible, about how they grow plants from cuttings. The next important characteristic is the movement. Do all living things move? In previous chapters, we saw how animals move from one place to another and show other body movements. What about plants? Do they also move? Plants are generally anchored in the soil and they do not move. However, various substances like water, minerals and the food synthesized by them moves from one part of the plant to other. Have you noticed any other kind of movement in the plant, like opening or closing of flowers? Non-living things like buses, cars, clouds, etc. also move. Is there something different in their movement from those of living things? There is a wide variety of living organisms, but all of them show some common characteristics as discussed earlier. Another common characteristic is that living beings die. Death is inevitable. Because organisms die, their types can survive over years only if they reproduce. Thus, we saw that all living things seem to have some common characteristics. Do we find some non-living things that also show some of these characteristics? Can we call a car, a clock, or a moon a living thing? Do they show all the characteristics of living things? In general, something that is living may have all the characteristics that we discussed. Non-living things may not show all these characteristics at the same time. Is this always true? Do we always find that living things definitely show all the characteristics of the living and non-living things never show any of them? To understand this better, consider a moong seed. Is it living? But when we plant it in the soil, it gives rise to a new plant. Here, we cannot easily decide what is living and what is non-living, because a seed earlier may be considered as non-living, and when it is planted in the soil, it may give rise to a new live plant. What then is life? Push your hand deep inside a sack of wheat. It's warm inside. The seeds respire and give out some heat. We see that respiration is a process that takes place in seeds when some of the other life processes may not be very active. So, this brings us to an end of this chapter. Thus, look at the diversity around you and consider life as a beautiful thing and live it happily. Hope that you have learned a lot of new things from this chapter. Hope to see you in the next class. That's all. Thank you.